On today's episode of the Forgiven Nutritionist podcast, I'm talking with Katie Jolly. She's a naturopath and a licensed Dr. Amen brain health trainer, and she has lived experiences of anxiety, depression, ADHD, and traumatic brain injury. Her journey out of concussion led her to specialize in brain health, and she realized that we are not broken. We just need to find the key to the door. As she healed her brain through lifestyle changes, her prior mental health symptoms also healed, allowing her to eliminate all medications. Katie now works globally as a brain health coach, helping others in their mental health journey. On today's episode, we're going to be talking a little bit about suicide, the seriousness of mental health. So please be sure to watch for listening ears that may be in the room with you when you listen to this episode. Here's a clip from today's show.
When I talk to people about suicidal ideation, which is extremely common in traumatic brain injury, it's way too common, right? Is that the person that is suicidal, they want an out. It's not about anything else. They want an out, and quite often we feel that the world will be better off without us. And that was one of the amazing things finding faith for me, is that if everybody has a purpose, like we're all loved, we all have a reason to be here. We may not feel loved, but there is something higher that loves you, you know? And we just need to get to the other side. We need to get through that moment and believe that it's possible.
Hey everyone, just a quick break to show some gratitude to our sponsors and give you some special deals. If you are looking for a trustworthy place to choose all of your supplements, FullScript has 285 different brands to choose from. They did the work for you to check quality standards for all the supplements they carry. These standards are important because they help to ensure a product is safe, effective, and accurately labeled. FullScript uses third-party companies to provide unbiased assurance that certain quality criteria are met when they add a company or product to their inventory. When you set up an account with FullScript, use my link and you'll always get 15% off your supplements. And thank you so much for joining me today, Katie.
Thank you for having me, Wendy.
Now, I'm a little bit familiar with you, and I just did an introduction about you, but why don't you tell my listeners a little bit about yourself?
So my background professionally is I'm a naturopath and a Dr. Amen licensed brain health trainer. Personally, I've had a massive journey in my lifetime of health issues, from ADHD, gut problems, depression, mental health, you name it, I've been there. But the biggest journey of my life was when I had a traumatic brain injury in 2020.
And is that kind of how you started in naturopathy, or had you already started before that as well?
Yeah, so I started as an actress. I wanted to be in the theatre, and at 17 I moved from New Zealand to the UK, and somebody told me to go vegan to get skinny. And so I became vegan, and I actually developed binge eating disorder and went into the theatre. I started drinking heavily, and as you do as part of that lifestyle, and I got very, very sick. And at 23, I came home and the doctor said they couldn't help me. They didn't know what was wrong with my liver at the time. And I found a functional doctor who worked with me on my food, and then moved into naturopathy from there. So I've been involved in studying naturopathy and natural health since I was 24. So a long time.
Yeah, well, that's wonderful. I'm not sure that a lot of people are kind of familiar with that. And that's one of the things, especially since I started working at the Amen clinics for my day job. I'm trying to introduce people to these other types of medicine, because I think we're all kind of stuck in, at least especially here in the States, we're all kind of stuck in the traditional medicine model, especially when it comes to insurance. And so there's not a lot of options that people are given except for what the traditional options are. And so maybe you could kind of explain a little bit what is naturopathy or naturopathic medicine, because I don't think a lot of people really understand what that even is.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. My parents are 83 and my dad's coming up for 84, and they grew up on cod liver oil, milk of magnesia, garlic when they're unwell. So I think it's actually something that historically people have used. We have to think that medication has really only been around for the last 80 years in the form that we take it today. And we used to rely on natural medicine, right? We give it a flash title, but it's really just looking at our food, the herbs. Natropathy uses supplements as well. But what we're wanting to do is look at the whole person and create a lifestyle. So that's what naturopathy really taps into, is empowering the person again, rather than being reliant on having a medication. I believe in both. I've used both. I believe in both. I think we need them. But naturopathy is just such a preventative model for people.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we're not familiar with. I think that medication is the first thing we go to instead of being the last thing that we go to, and that's, I think more doctors are slowly jumping on that bandwagon where, much to your point, like Chinese medicine, they've used that using herbs and things that were grown in the ground for thousands of years.
Yeah.
And it worked. So why mess with something that it works well, and there's things that we can get that really don't have side effects or minimal side effects. And really most of the side effects that they come with nowadays are because they're also mixing it with a medication that people are taking.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So how important is that preventative care, especially in naturopathic medicine? And what kind of strategies do you recommend?
Well, I think it's really important for people to understand that they can do things to actually support their own well-being. And one of the foundations which I've used through my own journey is really looking at nutrition. It's a massive, massive part. What we eat is creating our body. And then, different from the medical model, quite often with the medical model, you might go to the doctor for migraine and they give you a pill and you get your migraine pill, but you'll have these side effects. You'll have all these other things that are going on. But very rarely does the doctor look at why you have migraine. Mm-hmm. They may not look at food intolerances. Are you, especially with chocolate is one of my triggers, so looking at nutrition, then looking at the organ systems as well. Like, is your liver not doing very well? Are you not processing toxins properly? Is that why you're getting a migraine? And I think that's a really big part of healing, is looking, as Dr. Amen says, is looking at why.
Yeah. And when you mentioned migraine, I can remember being like 6 and 7 getting migraines, and it was so bad throughout my whole life, really just up until a couple of years ago. And it was when the first time I noticed a dramatic change was when I said a prayer, literally prayed for it with a friend. And that was the first time I noticed a change. And he's like, have you ever prayed for it? And, I think that we forget that we can pray for things for ourselves.
Yes.
We can pray for things like that. And it's not necessarily being selfish, because that's what he's there for. He's there to answer prayer, and he doesn't answer all the time when we want him to, but he eventually will answer. And so that was the first big change that I noticed when we prayed together, for it. And the second big shift was when I changed my diet and lifestyle. And I think gluten played a huge role for me anyways.
Oh, wow.
And so
yeah, I agree.
I did not realize that, how important diet and lifestyle was until now. I'm in the space that I'm in, of course, but yeah, diet and lifestyle can play a huge role in getting to that, figure out the why, rather than just accepting, I get migraines. Why would you want to suffer?
Yeah. And I think people we've become codependent on medication, and we're seeing it everywhere. I've got clients in America as well who talk about the healthcare system, the burden on the healthcare system. It's the same here in New Zealand. People have to wait a month to go and see their GP. And my mother was saying the other day, her elderly friend, her blood pressure was through the roof. So she panicked. She tried to get into the doctor. It was a month until she could see anybody. So they actually sent her to the emergency department. And immediately I was thinking in my naturopathic mind, is she drinking enough water? Is she having too much caffeine? Is she taking garlic and ginger? Like these things we can actually do to help ourselves rather than having to rely on someone to give us medication.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And since you mentioned diet, and we're all about brain health. I know that you said did you say you're the licensed brain health trainer?
Yes.
Or are you this brain coach?
The license, I didn't do the professional version. I switched out of that because I'm coaching now. So I did the brain health trainer course.
Right. Okay, great. Well, that's awesome. So in that course, I took that course as well, and they definitely talk about food and nutrition and supplements, and it's wonderful to hear some of the simple things. Again, it's not easy, but it's definitely simple things that you can do to help your brain. What are some, and I know that you mentioned that you had a traumatic brain injury also back in 2020. And so what are some things or steps that you've kind of used to rebuild or reshape your health since you've gone through that?
Yeah, well, it was really interesting going through the journey because I studied nutrition as part of the naturopathy, and I've seen with a lot of the really popular diets around the world, they all have patterns. They have a similar pattern, and all of them are focusing on low glycemic index foods. And when I had the traumatic brain injury, I was craving sugar and carbohydrate like you wouldn't believe. And that was my pattern before with binge eating disorder when I was vegan. Like, vegan's great for carbohydrate. You can eat as much of it as you want, supposedly. So I noticed the pattern and really started looking again at what had helped in the past. And I've also I'm a ketogenic coach as well. I don't fully push the keto diet. But what I found is that when I went back to that, really concentrating on vegetables, fats, and good sources of meat, my brain started to switch on. And as soon as I had, a great big thing of yogurt and chocolate and fruit, my brain would switch off. So you start seeing these patterns.
Mm-hmm. And that's interesting that you mentioned chocolate because chocolate does have some properties in it that can be good for some people and their brain health and their body health. But I think people use that as a free pass to just eat chocolate when they're not paying attention to what kind of chocolate they're eating and how much they're eating it.
I had a friend once, Wendy, who she used to look at all the different diets, and she said to me once, she said, I found this amazing diet and it's full of antioxidants. And I said, oh, what is it? And she said, well, I can eat as much dark chocolate and red wine and black organic coffee as I like. It's like, you just look for the loophole.
Yes. Yeah, and you mentioned the vegan before. I know somebody who is vegan, and they love to share with me how Oreos are vegan, so they can eat those all they want. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I don't think there's literally a real food item in the making of the Oreo.
Yeah, well, that's how when I went vegan, I put on 60 pounds in a year, and I was eating potato chips and dark chocolate, baked beans, and white bread. And that's what I thought vegan was.
Yeah. Well, and since you mentioned ketogenic, because that is fantastic for brain health. A lot of doctors talk about that. And I think that people don't really understand what keto is either, especially with the processed foods that are in the market that are advertised as keto. They think, okay, great, I can just eat these. And, when you turn over and look at the list of ingredients too, don't even look at, the fat or the sugar or anything. But when you look at the list of ingredients, they're basically just like eating the Oreo cookie because it's got all the man-made ingredients that are made to resemble something that is like a food.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And they do nothing but spike your blood sugar, which is not good for your body's health, let alone your brain health, unfortunately.
And I think that's where I've got friends who are general practitioners, so they're doctors in New Zealand. And what I find is some of the resistance to natural therapies or, these kind of fad diets that are out there is that there is such a lot of marketing and money behind that, money making, And I think that's where the resistance is, rather than really getting back to whole foods.
Yeah. What kinds of foods do you recommend, especially in the ketogenic diet, but just for brain health in general when you are talking with clients or patients?
Yeah, I'm a really big advocate of loading up on vegetables. I think that is, and again, if we look at the patterns of all the really popular and clinically proven diets like the Mediterranean or even the vegan, really loading up on vegetables and whole foods. For me personally, and what I've seen with people with a lot of mental health issues, is making sure that they're getting that regular source of protein. Now, I don't recommend going towards not having some sort of animal protein. I've just seen too many people with nutrient deficiencies.
Yeah, and one thing that I don't think people think about, because I'm especially in my age bracket right now, I'm that are especially around menopause and things like
Yes.
that. It's so critically important because your body is starving for extra nutrients. Your body is going through this shift again, and it's so critical, not just for your brain health, but for your bone health and just everything. And I think that people kind of downplay or don't really think about the effect that it's going to have on keeping your bones strong. And that's one of the biggest things, when you turn 65, that's one of the first things, unfortunately, that happens is you can lose your stability, and which again can stem from your brain, and your brain's not able to hold you upright as well and keep you off balance instead.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a key part. And I think that although it may seem hard, like I say to my children when I'm encouraging them to eat brain healthy foods, I said, if you cut your tongue out, you'd be fine, right? With this, however long the tongue is, 6 inches or so, that is dictating every single mindful decision. And it all comes down to taste. So I think that understanding that when we're making these choices for our health long term, it's understanding those foods may taste amazing, but they're hurting our body. That's what's keeping everybody in the doctor's surgery. It's worldwide.
Yeah, and it is very unfortunate, and especially when there's so many people. I think, for example, arthritis. It's such a common, unfortunate thing that people suffer from, and they think it's normal, and it's so unnecessary that, and again, because I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, which is horrendous joint pain. But as soon as I changed my diet, it's all gone. All those markers are gone of inflammation. And so people don't necessarily have to live. They don't have to be stuck with some of these diagnoses that they've been given,
Yeah, absolutely. And it's knowing what I love about particularly Dr. Amen's work is that there is hope. That was the biggest thing for me going through the traumatic brain injury. I was such a different person afterwards and lost so much of my identity and myself. And even just having that hope, like with the rheumatoid arthritis, you take these foods out, you feel better. Mm-hmm. You take these foods out and your brain works better.
Yeah.
It's empowering.
When you had your traumatic brain injury, was there something that, looking back, now that you can kind of put together and say, oh, I understand why I did that, whether it be, I don't know, you acted ridiculous. Because I know that sometimes when people get traumatic brain injury, they start to, and I don't know, I'm not saying you did anything this traumatic, but it can really change.
I'm sure I did.
It can really change a person's personality. Sometimes people they start stealing, or, they start binge drinking. There's a plethora of different things. Their moods completely change. They used to be the nicest, sweetest person, and now they're doing nothing but picking fights with their spouse or significant other. Is there something that if you look back that you noticed really like that?
Oh, there's a lot, Wendy. There's a lot. A couple of months after it was probably a month after I actually had the fall, I packed my entire car up. And this was in the beginning of winter in New Zealand. I packed my entire life into my truck and I was going to leave the family. And, at other times, like I set the top of my hair on fire.
Oh, goodness.
Just through having a burning things in the fireplace, and an explosion came out of the fire and set my whole head alight, burnt all my eyelashes and my eyebrows. I used to imagine killing my husband. Like it was, I was like a wild dog, and that's the only way I can describe it, because it's almost like there's nothing in your head, yet the emotions are just like you're in a wild sea. Yeah. It was the darkest time of my life mentally.
Well, and I was just talking with another provider about this. On the positive side, when you hit a bottom like that, yours had a cause, where you had traumatic brain injury. So there's those pieces, so it's something that people can grasp a hold of, I think, and put their finger on. And when you hit a bottom like that, because I think everyone hits a bottom for some reason in their life, whether it be financial losses or a job loss or something. But when you hit a bottom, I try to remember the positive is that you've got nowhere to go but up.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
It's like when you're at the bottom of a pool, remember that feeling when you're a kid and you just push off, and it may take a while to get up to the top, but eventually you make your way up, And so I'm glad you made your way up. That's for sure.
Thank you.
And how did God help you during your health journey when you were going through all that?
Well, you've read a little bit of my story. So it was, I didn't grow up with faith. I didn't grow up with faith. I did yoga, I read all sorts of different faiths, but I didn't have one. I just believed in energy. And it was about 6 months after the head injury, and I decided to kill myself. I'd had enough, and anyone who's been through traumatic brain injury before, it's a hard journey. It's a really hard journey out of the hole, and you're kind of stuck with your own thoughts. And I just decided that enough was enough. And so I packed all my medication into my bag. I had masses of medication. I had ADHD pills, nerve inhibitors, migraine pills, you name it. It was all in my swag bag. And I had a bottle of whiskey, and I drove 2 hours to a remote lake, which is supposedly a healing lake for the local Indigenous people here. And there was no cell reception when I turned up. So I walked around this lake, and all I wanted to do was get to the water to clean off my necklace to give to my 3-year-old daughter. That was what I wanted to leave for her. And I walked around the lake. I couldn't get to the water, and finally I did. And I put the necklace into the water, and it was all of a sudden, it was as though this light traced over the water, and I heard a voice as clear as yours saying, "Look up." And I looked up, and there was a mountain there that was covered with snow that I hadn't even noticed. And the light traced across the water. And the voice said to me again, "You are at the bottom. Keep looking up." And at that moment, in a lake where there was no cell service, my phone started pinging off. So I had messages from my family, my husband. I had a voice message from a client saying, "Katie, please help me. I need some nutrition help." And the voice said again, "You're at the bottom. Keep looking up." And it was at that point that God stepped into my life, and I came home and I completely changed. I joined a local church. I would sit at mass, and I would watch the people going up for communion, and I would cry. And I thought it was perimenopause, but all of a sudden my heart was opened, and it's just been a phenomenal part of my journey. And this whole thing of even being on social media and being out in the public eye, I'm asking, what is your will? How can I serve? So,
That's such a beautiful story. And actually, I completely forgot about your story. Thinking like that, when I was talking about that, oh my goodness. And I remember hearing that now and just thinking like, I just couldn't help but be touched, because I don't think that people and think about how they can get out. They get wrapped up in those moments, and they forget about all the possible positive things that they do have in their life, which I completely understand, because, it doesn't matter if you have a broken leg or something is going on in your brain. You're in a pain, and you're focused on that pain at that moment, and so it is definitely hard to see other things going on around you, especially when it's in your brain rather than, a broken leg, which is.
Yeah. And that's the thing with mental health, is that it's feeling trapped inside your own mind. And that's when I talk to people about suicidal ideation, which is extremely common in traumatic brain injury. It's way too common, right? Is that the person that is suicidal, they want an out. It's not about anything else. They want an out. And quite often we feel that the world will be better off without us. And that was one of the amazing things finding faith for me, is that if everybody has a purpose, like we're all loved, we all have a reason to be here. We may not feel loved, but there is something higher that loves you,
Yes.
And we just need to get to the other side. We need to get through that moment and believe that it's possible.
Yeah. And there are people that are willing to help and able to help you get to the other side and stick with you until you get to the other side.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because sometimes the journey can be a little rough, and it's not an easy path. There may be some, like I said, simple things you can do, but sometimes if you're addicted to certain things, I was addicted to Coca-Cola. So if you would have told me back then, you got to give up Coca-Cola, I would have been like, oh my gosh. And that was just Coca-Cola. But if you are addicted to other, drugs or things, it's definitely going to be a harder road. And it's just changing your diet and lifestyle, the habits that we get into, and then learning how to listen to the good side of our brain that's working still, and not listen to the bad side of our brain that isn't working well. And that's
absolutely.
Kind of the tricky.
Yeah, I think it's such a big. I think that, it's four circles, like Dr. Amen talks about, and the physical, the psychological, the social, and the spiritual. And quite often we forget that it is those four circles, that we need all of them. We may just be going on a diet to try and lose some weight, or we might be going to a therapist. It's the four circles. And I think that that's really one of the biggest issues that's happening in society. Definitely in New Zealand, the mental health rates here are very, very high for suicide, is that people forget the spiritual.
Yeah.
They forget that there is something higher that's holding us.
Yeah. And that's always there to help us, always there, and always willing to listen and be with us. And unfortunately, I think over the last several years, I think we're slowly coming out of it. We've been pushed apart. And so I think it's good to get us back together again. And that's one of the things that I really enjoy about my church as well. And I'm sure you found that as well. When you have a church family and you get involved, there's really something to be said about that community alone is very different and very healing and helpful as well. Do you find that at your church as well?
Absolutely. And I think even, for people with going through a journey, I found after my traumatic brain injury that volunteering was incredibly healing. being able, I started volunteering at church, and then I volunteered helping with my children's sports teams, actually getting back into society again, because whether it's mental health or it's physical health, we become really separated out and feel alone.
Mm-hmm.
That sense of community is incredibly healing.
Yeah. And we do forget that other people go through some very similar or almost identical things that we go through, because it does, when you're in the moment, it feels very isolating and like nobody could possibly understand. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think a lot of, and this is from clients that I've had, but it's also tapping into people that are healing, because there's a lot of communities. I've got a client who has ADHD, and she's on all the online forums about this is wrong with me, that's wrong with me, and that's their focus. Mm-hmm. Rather than thinking, okay, as a community or as a person with ADHD, how can I help myself? And then I'll share that.
Right. Right. Well, and that's such a beautiful thing that you have kind of flipped the script now as well, because now you help people. I mean, you were already on a helping healing path for your patients before, but now, and I don't know, do you feel that before your traumatic brain injury, some doctors kind of feel where they forget that the brain is actually connected to the body? Did you did you feel like that as well before all this happened?
Yeah, I knew nothing about the brain apart from, the physical structure of it and a few key pointers. Nothing.
Right.
But the gift of the traumatic brain injury for me, going through the darkness of my soul, is that this empathy for people, this deep, deep empathy, that I can turn around and say, yeah, I know that it's really hard giving up Coca-Cola. I felt the same about chocolate. I've been there. And then you start to understand that small changes can really, really help. Because you've been there, you've walked the path.
Yeah. I do think that that's a beautiful thing. And that's, and maybe you probably feel this too. That's why I'm hoping people, when they hear just this podcast, or when they reach out to me, or if they reach out to you, they understand, okay, they know what I'm going through. Yes, they've had some training and they can literally help me, but they very much understand the pains that you go through, and have gone through and lived through and experienced, so that's great.
Yeah. And I didn't when I was a naturopath prior to the head injury, I was quite militant with people, Wendy. I'd give them a food plan. I'd give them their supplement list. And I'm like, go, live your best life. Right. Just go do it. Do the rules, Uh-huh. And then coming back to it after the head injury, you actually realize how hard change is.
Yeah.
And that sometimes you have to start really, really small, just by drinking more water each day.
Mm-hmm. Well, and hopefully that gives people hope too, that if they're sitting there struggling or listening, that, you come out of this, and yes, the struggle is real, and you're not saying it's going to be easy, but yeah, if you make one small change, like you said, with just drinking a little bit more water, maybe that's the first thing that person needs to do, that change is really possible. And I think that people need a little more hope like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that they can execute that hope.
Yeah.
That they can actually take their power back by just making small lifestyle changes. And it's not as hard. I think in marketing, you get all these people that say, lose weight in 30 days, and they make these drastic changes. But what the billion-dollar health industry knows is that all those people listening out there, you're going to fall off. Of course you're going to fall off. And then you'll buy their program again in 6 months. Right. But if you start small, if you just think, okay, I'm going to move a little bit more today and I'm going to drink some water, that's where the changes really happen.
And since you have kind of gone through, well, not just naturopathy, but the traumatic brain injury, how has your approach been for brain health now really been to personalize things for your clients?
So what I look at doing is a full naturopathic assessment. I get them to get their blood work done, so I can see what other factors are playing in, if any of the organs aren't doing so well, or their hormones. And then because we don't have a SPECT scan in New Zealand, there's nothing here yet, Wendy.
Yes, not yet.
Nothing yet. So I use the Dr. Amen questionnaire to basically see what part of their brain is struggling. And then I marry that up with nutrient deficiencies. You know, like if somebody is low in iron and their limbic system is struggling, right? So they've got the symptoms of depression and we can see the limbic system is struggling, I'll go there with them. So it's very, very individualized. And then I've also studied life coaching, health coaching, yoga, you name it, I've kind of done it. So I put together an individual program to really help that person.
Well, and I think that's a very different model than what a lot of people are used to in traditional medicine. And that's what I really want people to understand, is that there are people out there like you and me and a whole bunch of other people as well that will give more personalized attention, and you definitely take time to figure out what's going on. And it sounds like you also, if you go down one path and then something's not working, then you change course and you go down a new path. Because sometimes those people look at those things as failures, but I think it's more information. Because, okay, you thought it was this, but now it's leading you down a new path. So that's getting you a little bit closer. Even though it wasn't working, it's still getting you closer to what you're trying to figure out anyways. Yeah.
And I think that the patterns can change. Like I had a client and she presented with anxiety. Everything in the Dr. Amen work was showing that her basal ganglia was firing. And then we worked through that, and then all these ADHD symptoms appeared, you know? But the biggest lesson that I had from the head injury was that I am not living that person's life.
Oh, yes.
You know, so I had a team of 4 specialists that would come out every week and they'd load me up with exercises and I'd get overwhelmed. And really, as a practitioner or as practitioners, we're not living that person's life. So what it's taught me when I'm working one-on-one is that I let the client guide me. You know, even though I may have the knowledge to help them, I let them guide me. So we do it at their pace. That's been the gift.
You'll have to help me work through that, because I'm still trying to master that skill.
Yeah.
I'm so eager because I want them to get there. You know, I lose a little patience. I'm like, come on, let's just do it. Let's do it. But yeah, it is hard. And I totally agree that, again, like I mentioned earlier, if someone would have told me you just have to give up Coca-Cola and your world will change, I would have been like, are you out of your mind? There's no way I'm giving up my Coca-Cola. But then I did hit a point where, yeah, no, I was done. I was done with Coke. There was no more Coca-Cola in my life. And so you do have to be ready to give up something or enter something in or add something into that same point.
Yeah. And I think it can take time for people. Like I've got a story of one client who 10 years ago, I told her to quit sugar. This is 10 years ago. And I saw her in the supermarket a couple of months ago. And she said, oh my God, I've been following this amazing doctor and, you know, it's the sugar-free diet. It's amazing. And I said to her, oh, that's great for you. Because at the time, I wasn't the key to her door. Mm-hmm. She wasn't ready. And sometimes we need multiple reminders, multiple messengers to actually unlock that door for our well-being.
That's a beautiful way to put it, because it's the same with kids, isn't it? You know, you could tell your kids to do something, but as soon as, you know, the aunt comes over or the babysitter or something, they'll do it, you know, and it's like, well, I just told you to do that.
Yeah. It's like my husband, he has a bad back and I've been telling him for years about the egg askew method.
Okay.
but he heard it on Joe Rogan's
Oh,
podcast.
yes, Joe Rogan.
You know, so now he's doing the stretches.
That's okay. Like you said, his door finally opened. It's okay. What kind of resources or books or websites did you find particularly helpful when you were going through your journey?
After the traumatic brain injury, once I was at a place where I could actually read again, I started looking at a lot of brain health websites globally, and that's when I came across Dr. Amen's body of work, and that was fundamental for me in healing my brain. Like the one resource. I'm talking the one resource, Wendy. You know, and then studying the Dr. Amen trainer course, that was the real catalyst for me. And then all of my previous knowledge of nutrition and naturopathy, the ketogenic diet, then that slotted into place. But for anyone, I think, that is going through a traumatic brain injury, like, start with Dr. Amen's work. It's phenomenal.
Yeah, he does have a lot of. I remember when I first heard him a couple years ago too, and I was flabbergasted again because for years I had suffered with depression and anxiety, and then it turns out I had traumatic brain injury, and no one had ever told me. And
wow!
It's just, yeah, you go through life, and you're like, why didn't anyone ever tell me about this? You know, just as something as simple as nutrition. I remember, I said about the headaches. Someone told me, I don't know, 30 years ago, oh, just eat a well-balanced diet. But they didn't tell me what that meant or what that included or what to do with that. They just said, well, eat a well-balanced meal. Okay. Well, at the time I was still living at home. And so I thought, well, I'm eating a balanced meal. My mom is cooking us dinner and, you know, and I still had Lucky Charms for breakfast, but I still had well-balanced meals. I thought, you know, because no one ever told me, you know, they just made that off the hand comment. So when I hear stuff like that, I was like, oh my gosh, why don't these doctors tell people this stuff more so people can use it or choose to ignore it, but then at least you still have the choice. You know, if you don't hear it, then you don't have the choice if you should do it or not. You know, and that's what I got frustrated.
And I think especially in New Zealand with we still advocate the food pyramid.
Okay.
And I was in the hospital last year with my daughter, and they had flyers on the wall with the food pyramid, telling people about healthy eating. So they were recommending 7 to 12 servings of carbohydrate per day, and that included bread. It didn't say what sort of bread, you know? So I think that the information that is out there that is being pushed through a lot of the more public channels are either these fad diets, right, which get a bad rap and don't work, or it's an archaic form of looking at nutrition.
Yeah, it's definitely archaic in some aspects. And I think that nobody's just printing up any new material or following all the additional new science that's out there. They're just going by what they thought 50 years ago.
Yeah. And because sugar, I mean, that's the fundamental brain breaker, I think, for most people, is actually understanding where the sugar is and the impact on your brain, that even if they just started getting that out, you know, or start reducing sugar, the effect on mental health is amazing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and which then stems into your overall health, really.
Yeah.
I had said one time I did a longevity podcast episode. It was a solo episode. And until just the last couple of years, it never really hit me how, you know, how you save, or you're supposed to save for retirement. I don't think that people when they're 20, 30, or 40 ever think about our health savings, you know, because we're supposed to start now or we were supposed to start when we were 20 and 30 and 40 for when we're 60, 70 and 80 and 90.
Yeah.
You're supposed, because all of these things that we're doing now are going to impact our health and our longevity and things we're able to do. And food is definitely sometimes, like you said, that sugar is a breaker, man, of your body and your brain. And those things can really impact you for 30 years before you're diagnosed with something. And by the time you're diagnosed, you're so far into an illness, it's going to take a while before you come out of it.
Well, I like the thought, if you bring it back to dental health, that if sugar can chew through the hardest material in our body, which is our teeth, what's it doing to the rest of our insides?
Yeah. That'll give you a pause.
Yeah.
So you mentioned before your silver lining, I think, or positive lessons that you kind of went through. What kind of support did you find the most valuable during your journey? I think that can be the hardest thing for people when they're going through a struggle.
Yeah, for me, with the traumatic brain injury, I had a team of specialists who would visit me each week, and that was a psychologist, a neurophysio, an occupational therapist, and there was another like neurooptometry sort of rehab stuff. Mm-hmm. And the person that I found to be the most beneficial, which I think is relevant to our role as coaches with people, was the occupational therapist. And being able to teach me to break down overwhelming steps into small pieces. That was fundamentally the game changer, because I felt as though I could again, and it's the small steps, like we were talking about the water or the daily exercise. It's those small steps that we stack and build positive habits. She was the game changer for me. The psychologist, and I think this can happen in a lot of therapy. I've had a lot of therapy over the years as well for depression and anxiety from my childhood, is that talking about the past doesn't necessarily help us move forward. Right. In some instances, but if we are taught how we can move forward, and that's broken down into small steps, it's just so powerful for every area of our life.
Yeah, that's another great way to look at it too. And that is one of the things that I enjoy about coaching too, because again, it's very hard for me to not get overexcited for the person that's doing something.
I hear you, Wendy.
But I did have a client, and it was literally as small as one week. She literally got her water bottle down, and she didn't even start using it. She just got it down out of the cabinet. And that was like the big step for that week. And actually, I was really proud of her for just doing that, because it took her 2 or 3 sessions before she was finally able to get it down out of the cabinet. Wow. And I think partially because, and maybe you can chime in with some of what your clients think, or for yourself, because I've been here as well. When you do something like that, it's a commitment. Like, it's okay, now I'm committed. I'm gonna start to possibly use this, and that change can be hard for us, especially the older we get. Change is definitely hard, at least for me.
Yeah, I agree. And I was having a conversation with a client yesterday about this, about getting leverage, for that change. And I said to her, one thing, we were talking about ADHD, which I have too. And I said to her, what I found really helpful is, okay, you understand the positive benefits of drinking more water, right? You got all that. We've got all the science on it. But it's also looking at, if I don't do it, how will I feel? So starting to get evidence that way. If I don't go for my daily walk, will I feel more tired? Generally, yes. Mm-hmm. If I don't drink water and I drink Coke instead, is my body going to be sorer? So looking at both sides of the coin.
Yeah. Well, and hopefully people can use that little tip too, maybe later on, and start to perform. I like to look at it as performing an experiment on yourself,
Yes.
and because I think we kind of, especially when we were I'm thinking back to when I ate the way I ate and drank the way I drank, I was so disconnected from myself. I really couldn't tell you if I stopped drinking Coke, if I felt different, because I just felt the same way all the time. And it was pretty yucky,
Yeah.
And so if you remove one thing, it didn't really make a difference because a couple hours later, I was just doing it anyways. So I think we get kind of really disconnected from ourselves. But when you start really paying attention and listening to ourselves, because all those little symptoms, are trying to tell our body's way of telling us something, I think it gets a lot more interesting when you start to pay attention to yourself and trust yourself, really.
And I think what I've seen early on in my clinic from going to the functional doctor when I was really sick, she specialized in food intolerances. And one thing that I learned from her is that we feel a certain way. We feel a certain way all the time. We're used to it. That becomes our normal. So it's only by doing an experiment, like you say, and extracting some of these things or adding some of these things in that we can potentially start to feel different. Because we don't know what we don't know.
Right. Especially when we're so ingrained and habitual and doing the same things day in and day out.
Yeah.
It is hard to see something that's different.
And it can be really small. I think that's where people get overwhelmed with health and natural health, is that the action can be really tiny, like drinking one more glass of water. Well, does that help your constipation? Right. Are you sleeping better? Has your headache lessened? Okay, no, it hasn't quite yet. So let's add another glass of water in. Has that helped the constipation?
Yeah.
I think experimenting is a more fun way to look at health rather than it having to be a militant lifestyle change.
It does give you great information about yourself, especially if you're going to use something or do something with it. That's great. So we mentioned supplements before. What kind of supplements, especially during your traumatic brain injury, did you find especially helpful, or do you highly recommend now on the regular basis for people, for brain health in general, even?
Yeah, so for traumatic brain injury, one of the interesting things that I found out is that the gut becomes incredibly leaky after a head injury. So I went on to things like L-glutamine, slippery elm, to basically help the gut again, and using hydrolyzed collagen, which I would recommend, again, if we haven't got any vegans or vegetarians in the room. Gelatin has such a high amino acid profile, and it is brilliant for the gut. It's brilliant for your joints, brain health in general. So that is something that I added in. And then really, I'm a really big fan from having a sports background. I used to box for years, and I've done marathon and endurance cycling as well, is amino acids. I found the branch chain amino acids to be incredible for brain health. And then because sleep is such a big part of traumatic brain injury as well, really looking at melatonin, magnesium glycinate. There's, herbs like valerian and chamomile. There's so many, but I think it's really looking at your individual issues that are happening within the body.
Yeah, I agree. And sometimes I find that just getting a good fish oil or omega-3.
Yes, fish oil. Yes.
Is the first best way to start, simplest way to start, because so many people are deficient and so many people are not taking that. And if it's one small thing that you can do to help, of course, I try to tell people too, and I'm sure you feel this way too, you can't out-supplement a bad diet. So you can, if you're still going to continue eating and drinking a certain way, all the supplements you buy will not it may be a waste of money if you're just going to continue your diet and lifestyle the way you are currently. So you do have to, I think, do some certain changes. But yeah, for me, I love a good fish oil or amino, omega-3, I think is a great place to start.
Yeah, absolutely. And vitamin D as well. I mean, the research around vitamin D and brain health is phenomenal. And we're not getting enough of it. Like, it's winter here in New Zealand and my children were ill last week. And I realized I didn't have any sun on my skin in a week. So I'm supplementing.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you mentioned collagen, because I always forget about collagen, and I have some here actually. And I'm going to start taking that again. Because I forget about what a simple thing that is that you can take as well to kind of help. And I know it's not needed for everybody all the time, but I have it. I'm going to use it, I think.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, and this might be a little bit left field for the podcast, but in my Facebook group, there is a scientist who has done his PhD research on photons, which we all have in the body. And for those listening that have a faith, he terms it the God particle, because it's in all living things. And we emit more from our hands and from the third eye area. I've got a friend who's a neurooptometrist, and he said that they found when people prayed for a person who was sitting in the other room, the photons increased around this person. Wow. Okay, very, very strange phenomena. But here's the golden ticket, is that gelatin increases photons in the body.
Oh.
Yeah.
That is interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's increasing our natural life force. So that's why I'm scooping the hydrolyzed collagen every day.
Yeah, that's interesting. Am I part of your Facebook group? I think so. I'm going to have to.
Yeah, I'll invite you in. That's, yeah. Very, very interesting people in there.
Well, usually at the end of every episode, I always ask my guests for their don't miss this moment. So it would be the one key takeaway you'd want the listener to really remember or to start focusing on. What would your don't miss this moment be from today?
I think for me, if I could give people one message, is that you're not broken. You're not broken. And keep looking up.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Beautifully said. So where can people find you and follow you? And are you able to see clients all over the world, or just in
Yes. Yeah. I've been to. My children love it. I said I've been to Ireland and Bulgaria, and I've got a lot of clients in the United States, and it's all just virtual. Right. So I'm in the process of reworking my website, but I'm on Facebook, just under Katie Jolly, or the Facebook group is Brain Gardeners Global. Great.
Well, I will put links to that in the show notes. I'll put a link to the Amen Clinics or Amen University in the show notes as well, so people can look at some of what would be the course that you would recommend? Do you have a course that you would recommend people look at, or just any of his courses?
I think it really depends on what their issue is. Right. For parents looking at that Brain Thrive by 25.
Yeah.
That has been, even just digging into some of the content, that has phenomenally changed my relationship with my children. Phenomenally. And then obviously the Brain Warriors Way, that was where I started with the book. It's incredible. There's so much in there, Wendy. Take your pick.
Yeah, there is a great one for insomnia. I like the Change Your Brain, Change Your Life. And it's, because it gives you a lot of real insight into the body and how the brain actually works. And I think when people really understand that, it makes them a little more in tune or intrigued to actually take care of it.
Yes.
Yeah. They have a vested interest in their brain. Well, it was such a pleasure to have you on today, Katie, and maybe I can have you back again someday if you're up for it.
Oh, I'd love it. I'd love it, Wendy. That's awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. Brain MD nutraceuticals are high-quality supplements specifically designed to support and enhance brain health. Developed by Dr. Daniel Amen and his team of experts, these supplements use carefully selected ingredients backed by scientific research to promote cognitive function, mood stability, and overall mental wellness. Brain MD's commitment to purity and efficacy assures that their supplements provide targeted nutrition for the optimal brain performance and long-term brain health. Be sure to click my link in the show notes. If you want to continue learning and hearing all things nutrition for your mind, body, and soul, click like, subscribe, or favorite me on whatever podcast platform you use, or you can find me at ForgivenNutritionist.com. This podcast was designed to educate, inspire, and empower you to achieve your health and wellness goals. It is not meant to diagnose or treat any illness or medical condition or take the place of any treatments from your current healthcare providers.